Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. This has been quite a day here. We have just seen an arraignment which was the result of a criminal complaint that shocked everyone in connection with the Larry Nassar case. Remember, that was the case where the doctor had molested all of those women who came forward so bravely to talk about what happened to them. What you're seeing right there, though, is the courtroom in the Tex McIver case. That is an Atlanta-based lawyer accused of killing his wife. He says it was just an accident. The testimony that we've been hearing now, and the reason that we're not staying in this live, is because there's a lot of testimony about a will, a lot of testimony about motive. The question is, would Tex McIver have killed his wife on purpose over money? Or was this just an accident? Prosecutors calling witness after witness to try to show there was a financial motive. She was preparing to change her will. She wanted to change her will. Tex McIver was upset about that. He was delaying going to do that. But this is another attorney who has been called to talk about that. And as you can imagine, it gets a little bit slow. We are keeping a very close eye on it, though, and we will go back in live if there are any critical moments in that case. The third case we've been covering here on the Law and Crime Network is one of Leon Jacobs, accused of attempting to kill his ex-girlfriend, along with his current girlfriend trying to kill her ex-boyfriend. So this is a case where we saw the sentence in this case happen after hours last night. This is a trial we've been covering. The jury decides the sentence in this case. They decided it late last night, but just want to bring you up to date on that case, on the verdict, and then we're going to show you a little bit about what happened in the sentencing hearing. But first, here's a little bit on the Leon Jacob trial.
Accused of arranging a murder-for-hire plot to kill his ex-girlfriend and his current lover's ex-husband, took the stand in his own defense on the third day of testimony. Leon Jacob testified he only hired a private investigator who turned out to be an undercover police officer to investigate his ex-girlfriend, Megan Veritas, not to kill her, as the state contends.
It was to finalize some plans that I had had with somebody I thought to be a private investigator.
The defendant says Valerie McDaniel arranged for the services of the hitman, and he was not fully aware of the specifics.
I never asked to have anybody hurt, killed, harmed, kidnapped. I never asked for anybody to be in any way physically hurt.
And he stressed how he still loved Megan.
I think that when you give your heart to somebody for such a long time, that part of you always still loves them.
But during cross-examination, the defendant took exception to the prosecutor's attempts to sully his character.
So when you tell the members of this jury that you're heartsick over Megan, that's not really true, is it? Because it sure didn't take you long to move on, did it?
Matters of the heart and how you feel are subject to the way you feel at a moment. I mean, you're asking me to get up here and say that I'm some womanizer. That's fine. You can characterize me as that. It doesn't make me guilty of solicitation of capital murder. I have no problem sitting here and saying that I slept with Valerie 7 days after Megan and I broke up. But I'm not on trial for being a womanizer. I'm on trial for solicitation of capital murder. So you can assassinate my character all you want up here. It doesn't make me guilty of what you've charged me with.
The prosecutor also questioned the defendant's testimony that he did not want to hurt anyone.
I never asked for anybody to be hurt or kidnapped, correct?
True.
But that's not true, right? Because you told Javier, snatch her, put her in a room, and tell her if she doesn't leave, I'm going to kill her parents, right?
If that's what you say, I said.
Did you say it, Mr. Jacob?
Sure.
Shortly after the testimony, the case and Jacob's fate was in the hands of the jury. After less than 2 hours, the jury came back with a guilty verdict.
State of Texas versus Leon Philip Jacob. We, the jury, find the defendant Leon Philip Jacob guilty of solicitation of capital murder as charged in the indictment signed by the foreman of the jury. Cause number 1543812. We, the jury, find the defendant Leon Philip Jacob guilty of solicitation of capital murder is charged in the indictment.
The sentencing phase begins this week. The defendant faces life in prison. This is Rachel Stockman for Law&Crime.
All right, so the sentence happened late last night, but there was victim impact testimony. There were witnesses who testified. This is a guy who took the witness stand and blamed his now dead ex-girlfriend for basically setting the whole thing up, even though he's on camera and he's on tape saying again and again that he wants his ex dead. And remember, they staged photos, and this was a mess, this entire thing. The fact that he took the stand, got to give him credit for trying to take the stand in this case, but it certainly did not help him. We've got an amazing guest here, but before we go to them, I want to play a little bit of what happened in the sentencing hearing. This was Deputy Galvin, who was on the witness stand talking about jailhouse phone calls made by Leon Jacob.
The state of Texas calls Deputy Galvan. Deputy Galvan, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, my name is Pete Galvan.
And Deputy Galvan, briefly, could you tell us how you're currently employed?
Currently, I'm employed with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I've been there nearly 27 years, and I'm assigned to a jail intelligence unit.
Let's pull that mic. I think it's a small, thin one.
Tell me again what your current assignment is.
I'm assigned to a jail intelligence unit.
What does that mean?
I work with outside agencies as well as our own agencies, and mainly my primary responsibility is to monitor inmate phone calls.
Per our office's request, were you requested to monitor phone calls for a defendant by the name of Leon Jacob?
Yes,
And did that request come from an investigator with the Harris County District Attorney's Office named Brian Powell?
yes,
So during the course of your employment, did you monitor phone calls by defendant Leon Jacob with a SPIN of 01651455?
yes, I did.
And as before you came to court today, did I have you review phone calls that were made by the defendant from the Harris County Jail?
Yes,
And were you able to match up the discs with the phone calls that were actually made from the Harris County Jail?
I did.
And were you able to identify that these were phone calls made by inmate Leon Jacob?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness? You may. I'm going to show you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 78, 79, and 80. Are these the discs that you reviewed prior to coming to court today?
Yes, they are.
And do they fairly and accurately depict phone calls made by the defendant in this case?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, State offers State's Exhibit 78, 79, and 80, and tender to opposing counsel for any objections.
We have no objection, Your Honor, as long as we remind the court that we do have a motion in file, the motion to suppress on certain jail calls. Anything involving attorney-client privilege, of course, Your Honor.
Thank you. State 78, 79, 80 was minutes.
May I publish, Judge?
So not only is this guy allowing all the evidence to pile up against him, he also makes jailhouse phone calls. We're going to have Eddie Hayes, the famous criminal defense attorney, and Carissa Kranz coming back after this break in a moment. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. This has been quite a day here. We've been covering a sort of an amazing arraignment out of Michigan connected to the Larry Nassar case. That is now over. His boss, it turns out, had his own problems with harassing students and also totally inappropriate sexual material found on his computer. We are also, I want to show you the Tex McIver trial. This is the Atlanta-based attorney accused of murdering his wife. This is live, what you're watching right there. This is important testimony, but I will be honest with you, it's not that compelling. It's basically, it is testimony from lawyer after lawyer talking about motive. Again, his motive to kill was money. They're talking about her will, the desire on her part to change the will. Now that you know that, I am going to spare you the details of codicils to wills, etc. And we want to show you something that happened last night, which was sort of unbelievable in connection with what is called the Leon Jacob case. We were talking about it before the break. This is a guy who tried to solicit hitmen to kill his ex and got his then girlfriend to try. And these are staged photos, meaning this is his ex agreeing to do this so that they'd have more proof, meaning they showed him these pictures to say, look, we did it. See what happened? That became further evidence against Leon Jacob in connection with this case. Before we show you a little bit more from the sentencing phase that happened last night, I want to introduce my guests. We've got amazing guests here. Ed Hayes is one of the best-known attorneys in the country, certainly in New York. He is the go-to guy, as they call him. And Carissa Kranz joins us, a Florida-based former prosecutor. Before we go into a little bit more of what we saw in the sentencing hearing, Ed, unusual for a jury to be doing the sentencing, right?
Happens, I think, in Texas. It may happen in some other states as well. But generally speaking, you don't have much of a chance to educate the person that's going to make the sentence. But in this case, this guy's such a ridiculous, gross person that I don't think, even Pope Francis would have given this guy, a million years.
And Carissa, he made the choice. He got the choice between jury and judge and decided on jury. I guess when you're in his position, there's sort of like what's worse question, right?
Well, I don't think that this guy has very good judgment.
In general. Right.
First, the crimes that he was found guilty of. And then he takes the stand in his own defense, which ended up making the case worse for him. And now he's allowing a jury to decide his sentencing rather than a judge that may be able to understand mitigating factors.
Well, you want to talk about bad judgment? What I'm about to play you is the ultimate in bad judgment, okay? You are in prison, accused of soliciting a hitman to kill your wife. You know what they do in jail? They record your conversations. Everyone knows that, right? They record conversations. So, they recorded his conversations. And here is one of the ones that they recorded that he had with a local news reporter.
Jail.
I did.
And were you able to identify that these were phone calls made by inmate Leon Jacob?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness? You may. I'm going to show you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 78, 79, and 80. Are these the discs that you reviewed prior to coming to court today?
Yes, they are.
And do they fairly and accurately depict phone calls made by the defendant in this case?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, State offers State's Exhibit 78, 79, and 80, and tenders to opposing counsel for any objections.
We have no objection, Your Honor, as long as we remind the court that we do have a motion in file, the motion to suppress on certain jail calls. Anything involving attorney-client privilege, of course, Your Honor.
Thank you. State 78, 79, 80 with minute.
May I publish, Judge?
Yeah, I know.
Happy together. Will this all go away?
I hope so, yeah. I truly hope so.
I told Adam I want Bradley Cooper to play me in the TV movie.
Yeah, I know.
Did he tell you?
He's already played you.
Hello, this is a pre.
I've Googled it. I've tried. I've Googled it.
Well, it may suppress anything else coming out. You're not going to hear anything. According to Caitlin, what's her last name?
Caitlin?
Yeah. She's look her up. She's cute. She looks like Valerie did when she was younger.
Yeah.
She's really hot, actually. I mean, I know my wife's dead and I have some more on her, but this one's cute.
Okay, to be clear, this is recorded conversations this guy had while he is in jail, accused of soliciting a hitman to kill his wife. He's talking about Bradley Cooper playing him in the movie. Yeah, right. She wants to sleep with me, talking about a local reporter. She's really hot. I mean, this guy, Ed, is beyond sort of, a piece of work.
This is why people watch this station. Because when you look at this, it makes your whole day. You can talk about it for the rest of the day. Did you see what this guy did, Leon J? Right? I mean, the guy's ridiculous. And And the other thing is, why did he want to kill him? I mean, what's his motive? It must have been something. He ended up with like 10,000 years. I mean, why would you do this?
And Carissa, like, again, the idea that we're talking now about the sentencing phase, which happened last night, this is just more evidence against him.
It is more evidence against him, like his mother said in another recording earlier, which was played earlier on the network. He can't get out of his own way because he can't just stop talking. And he took the stand in his own defense, and he keeps talking, and now he wants the jury to decide for him. He thinks he can defend himself, but everything he says makes it worse.
And offends the jury.
And he thinks he can smooth talk the jury. That's what he's thinking. He's thinking, hey, the ladies like me. I'm that guy. All right, we got to take a break here. We're keeping a close eye on the Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, Georgia. Again, that's live. That's where a lawyer is accused of killing his wife. He says it was an accident. That's a close case, by the way. There are not a lot of people here at Law&Crime who think that he's going to be found guilty of murder. But let's take a break here. We got a few more seconds, but in the MacGyver case, this witness, again, we're saying it's not that compelling, but super important, right, Carissa?
Right. The jury needs to understand, in this case, the difference and how to interpret a will. But I think, I know we're running out of time and going to break, but it really isn't looking good for the prosecution.
No, except that they've also got other charges against him. So we're going to take a break. Talk about MacGyver. We'll talk about Jacob. Coming back with Law&Crime in a minute. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We are covering two big stories for you. First, out of Atlanta, a prominent attorney there accused of murdering his wife. He says it was an accident, admits he shot her in the backseat of a car with her best friend driving the car. The question is, why? Was it all a setup, or was it just an accident? We're continuing to cover that case live. They are focusing there still on an issue of a will. The question, of course, is money was the motive. We want to show you another case we've been covering. That's the Leon Jacob case. This is a guy who was convicted of attempting to hire a hitman to kill his girlfriend. Did it allegedly in conjunction with his then-girlfriend, who was allegedly trying to kill her ex-husband as part of this. That woman actually killed herself. So it's just Leon Jacob on trial here, convicted. Jury gets to decide the sentence. Can be anything from probation to effectively life in prison. And so we're hearing testimony now in the sentencing phase. Jury deciding what sentence should he get. And this is testimony from a man who said that he had to deal with Leon Jacob when Leon Jacob stole his wife. His name is Darren Gooden. Let's listen.
Thank you, Judge. Do you know the defendant Leon Jacob?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you became aware of who he was?
My ex-wife worked at a hospital in Youngstown where he was a resident at the time, and that's how I started to learn about him.
Okay, now, so your wife at the time, what was her name?
Patricia?
Okay. She worked at a hospital where he was in the residency program?
Yes.
What was your wife's job there?
She was a recruiter for the residency program.
So while they were working together, did you ever meet him on a social occasion, or?
I just heard her talking a lot about him. There might have been one occasion, I think, when I was at the hospital to meet her for something, and she introduced me to him at that time.
And what year was this, if you remember?
Probably around 2011, maybe 2010, 2011.
And was there ever a time that you became aware of a relationship between your wife and the defendant?
Yes, there was.
Could you tell us how you found out about that?
Yes, I took my son to the hospital one night. He was having a hard time breathing, and she didn't want to go to the hospital with us. And when we ended up leaving the hospital, I got followed by Leon all the way to my house, and then he sped off.
Okay.
And
Look, let me stop you there. So you took your son to the hospital, and your wife at the time, Patricia, did not want to come with you.
Correct.
Did that seem strange to you?
Yes.
Okay. And this would have been the same hospital where she worked at, along with the defendant.
It was actually a different hospital.
Okay.
I don't know if he was working at the time at that one or not. What I did was I ended up going through her phone records, and I found a phone number that she was on the phone with for a couple hours that night while we were at the hospital, and I called it back, and Leon answered the phone.
Okay, so going back to when you were coming home from the hospital, you said you were being followed.
Yes.
Okay, and did you know at the time what kind of car the defendant was driving?
I heard my wife talk about what kind of car he had, that then kind of put two and two together there.
And the person that followed you home from the hospital, the car that you saw, was that the same car that you believed the defendant to be driving at the time?
Yes.
And how far was it from the hospital to your house?
Approximately 7 miles, 8 miles.
Okay. And did that car following you home, did it follow you the whole way home?
Yes.
And was it that same night that you had looked at some records to see if there was any suspicious activity on your wife's phone?
Yes.
Right. Did you ask your wife about this?
Yes, I did.
Did you call the number yourself?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what was the conversation you had with the defendant at that time?
I asked him if him and my wife were having an affair, what was kind of going on, and he told me, you need to talk to your wife about that.
And at the time, how old were your children while this was going on?
12 and 14.
And so, what was the custody agreement like when you were separated while the divorce was happening?
They made it very difficult for me to see the kids. They wouldn't let me see them on my certain days. They.
And when you say they, who are you referring to?
Leon and my ex-wife.
Okay.
Patricia. They would bribe them. My kids told me that they would take them out to eat, or if they run away back home, Leon would buy them certain stuff, whatever they wanted. It was just like whatever they really wanted, they manipulated them, I guess.
So you think, based on the circumstances, that the defendant, along with your ex-wife, was interfering with your ability to see your children?
Mm-hmm.
But you did have visitation. Was it
Yes.
50-50, that sort of thing?
So this is the sentencing phase. This is where a jury, actually, unique thing, the jury decides what his sentence should be. And Eddie Hayes, as we were listening to this, we're thinking, wow, this guy's, as much of a dirtbag as we thought.
Yeah, but why is he getting to testify? The guy's facing life in prison, and this guy's talking about an affair he had, 7 years ago? What has that got to do with it?
Well, I guess part of it is that this case was all about how he manipulated, including the woman who was his girlfriend at the time, right, and how manipulative this guy was. His girlfriend, of course, killed herself. Possibly relevant because of that?
The evidence against this guy is overwhelming. They don't need this. What do they care?
Well,
to me, it's extremely prejudicial. And what does it add to their case?
It shows you what a bad guy he is.
I know that.
Yeah.
Everybody that gets convicted of murder is a bad
I
guy.
got it.
I also think because it's a sentencing phase, there's always a score sheet that's considered, which is aggravating and mitigating factors. So they're going to take into consideration all his previous history in order to come up with a sentence that they think is appropriate based on the crime.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of a sentencing hearing, you're allowed to say, the guy was a Boy Scout, he was such a wonderful boy, and this and this. So why shouldn't you be able to also say the guy was a horrible person?
Well, wait. All right. First of all, the question is whether or not the evidence should be induced at a sentencing case for a murder case as to whether he had it. It's pretty old.
Murder.
Yeah, it's stale. It's pretty stale. 7 or 8 years before. And the second place is, suppose they want to put on, well, he was a lousy husband. And he had affairs.
But they're allowed to bring in all this evidence to evaluate him and his character. The standard is much lower. Even in sentencing hearings, hearsay is allowed, whereas in a normal trial, hearsay is not allowed.
We disagree.
So
to me, it's unnecessarily prejudicial, and it's something you don't need. It's cumulative. The word in the legal word. It's the only legal word I know.
Let's take a break here. We will come back with this and the Tex McIver trials in a moment. Welcome back to Law and Crime. We are keeping an eye on a now empty live courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia. That is where attorney Tex McIver is on trial for murdering his wife. He says it was an accident. Everyone agrees happened in the backseat of the car. We've been listening to a lot of testimony all day about wills. Of course, the important question there, money. Was money the motive? We're going to keep an eye on that. If there is an important witness that isn't just talking about codicils to wills, then we're going to go back in live. In the meantime, we're covering the Leon Jacob case. This is a case where this guy was sentenced last night after hours. There was a sentencing phase in this case. He was convicted of attempting to murder his ex-girlfriend. They basically staged it. They put photos of her bound and showed them to him, basically saying, that's him, saying, you know, look, we got her, we did it, just to confirm that that's exactly what he wanted to happen. He was found guilty, and the question then in the jury's hands was, does he get anything from probation to life in prison? So we have been listening to the testimony of a guy named Darren Gooden. Basically, Darren Gooden was married, and Leon Jacob stole his wife. And as you can imagine, Darren Gooden wasn't happy about it. This is the sentencing phase where the jury is deciding what punishment he should receive. Let's hear more from him.
I had some, you mean, what did I, I'm sorry, rephrase it?
When you actually personally interacted with him, can you tell us about those situations?
I had some restraining orders I had to put in place. Following us around, sitting in front of the house, type deal. A couple threats, he threatened us, threatened to blow up my house, threatened to kill me.
Threatened to blow up your house, and this is the house now. You're now living in a separate house.
Correct.
When you're separated from your wife.
Yes.
How about when you went to pick up the children at any time? Did you ever encounter him on those occasions?
Yes.
And what was that like?
He'd be standing outside, yelling, screaming, you know, making threats towards me.
What sort of things would he say to you?
He said he wanted to kill me. He said he wanted to fight me. Just bad mouthing, swearing, you know, calling me all kinds of names and stuff like that.
Did you ever engage him back in those discussions?
No.
Okay. Was there ever a time that the police were called on an incident regarding your son?
Every time,
Okay.
pretty much, yes.
Okay. And could you tell us about an occasion where, are you aware of an occasion where the police were called shortly after your son had left your house?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
My son showed up at the house for my visitation. They ran home, went back to their mothers.
And so when you're clear, again, you're talking about your son and your daughter.
Yes, they both left. They ran back. It was probably maybe a mile and a half or so back to the other house.
Okay.
About a half hour later, the police showed up on my doorstep and said he got hit in the chest. Leon punched my son in the chest twice, I think he said, and they tried to blame it on me to get child endangerment on me, so I would not be able to see my kids.
And you were never charged with that or anything related to that, correct?
I'm sorry, what's that?
You were never charged? You never had
No.
a criminal charge regarding
Not
that
at all, no.
Okay.
All right, Ed Hayes, it's not just about having an affair. It's about the fact that Leon Jacob punched his kid and then tried to frame him for it. Now, is that relevant in the connection with the sentencing?
Wait. To me, the cross is about a dispute over money with his ex-wife. Right? The first thing you do is you say, look, you were fighting with your wife over who gets the house, who gets the support. That's how you do the cross. All right. Now, as to whether or not he framed this guy, that's a problem.
That's relevant then.
Yeah, well, it's relevant because there's one thing to be a bum. There's another thing to frame people. That's pretty bad.
Right. I think that's the explanation that we were.
But I would have crossed them completely differently. I would have crossed them about the money.
We're going to see more, I think, about the cross on that. But you know what? I want to just dip in real quick to the Tex McIver case out of Georgia. Again, this is a new witness taking the stand. If it's another lawyer talking about the will, I'll summarize what the point of it is. If it's actually a more compelling witness, we'll listen. But let's listen in. Again, he is charged with murder. He admits he shot his wife in the backseat of a car, but he says they hit a bump and the gun went off. A lot of people here think this is a very tough case for the prosecution to win. Welcome back. We are watching the testimony of Angie Brooks in the Tex McIver murder case. This is someone who worked with the victim for 36 years and knew her very well. Combination of personal and professional here. Carissa Kranz, we've been listening in the break. We heard right before the commercial she was talking about how Tex would sometimes get irritated at her on the phone, sometimes get angry, but
you also heard her refer that Tex referred to her as darling. So that might just be normal interactions between a married couple who was on the phone talking throughout the day, having a dialogue. But it's also, it could go to motive, which the prosecution is trying to prove.
Let's go back in live.
Did you or anyone else from the speakerphone group ask any questions?
Not that I remember.
Do you remember what day that would have been in that first week?
No.
It's okay. It's okay. As part of your sort of the many responsibilities you have at U.S. Enterprises, one of them being responsible for benefits and payroll at the office.
Correct.
And early in that first week or week and a half, did you reach out to the benefits, sort of the third party that goes in between your benefits there at U.S. Enterprises?
I think it was around the 1st of October.
Okay. And why did you do it?
Well, we have...
I'm sorry. Your Honor, can we approach just briefly?
Mics go off during a sidebar when the lawyers talk to the judge. You know, Eddie Hayes, we've been talking here as we've been listening that some of the prosecution's case has been sort of confusing, where we're trying to figure out exactly why is this witness being called.
I don't understand why the prosecution is calling it. The main thing she says is they got along well, right? The second thing is you want to try a nice, simple case, right? You don't want to confuse the jury.
He owed her money?
I think the
What
only
is she going to do? Foreclose on the ranch? She's 75 years old. You know how long it takes you to foreclose on something? Right? And you know how she'd look in the newspapers? What, are you crazy? She has social standing. She has community standing. She's going to foreclose on her husband? Come on, give me a break.
I think they're trying to prove motive, and the only way they're going to prove motive, because this case has reasonable doubt all over it, is by confusing the jury, by calling all these witnesses.
That's we like that.
That's the only way to win this one on these charges. You have to confuse the jury because they're just going to be there arguing and saying, well, this doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. And if they bring in 90 witnesses to testify, they're going to say, well, they must have a case because 90 people are testifying for the prosecution.
You know, maybe.
But if they listen, they're going to see, well, it doesn't make sense. It just depends who is the panel of jurors.
I'd like to sum up in this case, I'll tell you now. First, I'd like to collect the retainer because he's got access to money. After I collect the retainer.
You both were saying you think this case was overcharged.
It's overcharged.
They might have a shot on involuntary manslaughter. The only problem...
Is that going to be on the jury's sheet as a lesser?
I would think so. How could it not be?
If it's not listed as a lesser, I think it's a not guilty.
You know what?
Murder.
Excuse me for saying this. The indictment, is it a lesser in the indictment? Is it one of the counts?
I didn't see it in the indictment.
Yeah. So, but they can still ask for it, and ultimately, at the end of the case, the judge decides exactly what's going to be allowed or not allowed in terms of lesser included.
The other thing is, Dan, is the licensing to have pistols in Georgia is virtually non-existent, right? So he's legitimately got the pistol. He has a sleep disorder. He wakes up. The pistol goes off.
He asked for the pistol,
right, but nonetheless,
And darling.
Yeah.
He asked for it, darling.
Yeah. Right before he's going to kill his wife. That's like out of a movie. Let's go back live. Yeah. Let's go back.
It's county sponsored. So we wanted to make sure that when the time came that we knew exactly how to handle it.
In your conversations with Diane, have you ever talked to her about her will?
We did.
I'm going to show you what has been already admitted as State's Exhibit 441. I'm going to direct you to the back 2 pages here and have you take a look at that for me. Let me know on those back.
All right, so it sounds like this is all about the possible financial motive here, that he calls and he asks about the Social Security, that he may be getting some money from the 401k. But, Ed, you keep saying again and again, so what?
Yeah, so what? Also, the other thing is, listen, I'm 70. He's 75. Let me tell you something. When you get to be our age, the last thing you want is to die alone. The last thing you want is to have somebody not around for the last years of your life. I mean, why would he do this? And how would he possibly know that if he shoots to the back of a seat, which he doesn't know really anything about where she's sitting, that's going to kill her? The odds are it's not going to kill her.
Real quick, Chris. Yeah.
No, when I was a prosecutor and I would do voir dire with jury selection, if you asked a jury, would you rather let a guilty man walk free or put an innocent man behind bars? Unanimously, everyone would say they would rather let a guilty man walk free than someone innocent go behind bars. In this case, there's reasonable doubt all over
Let's take a quick break. We'll go back live in the courtroom when we come back.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gross.
Hey, are you ready? Any questions from the jurors? Deputy Burke, if you wouldn't mind getting those, please.
This is where the jurors can ask questions. Again, not something you see in every courtroom, right?
Right.
They don't allow that in New York.
Yeah, they don't allow.
They do in civil cases sometimes.
But in a criminal case, allowing the jury to ask questions directly is unusual.
And it'll glean some insight on where the jury is going, because this is so confusing. It'll be interesting to see what kind of question the jurors ask, because that will implicate whether or not they think maybe he's guilty, maybe he's not guilty, and are they really understanding and parsing through all the evidence and all these witnesses and all these really technical legal terms.
Right, and what are they focusing on? Meaning, are they focusing on this idea that there could have been, this financial motive and how much money, et cetera, or are they focusing on what was her salary more to suggest that he's losing, as Ed has pointed out a number of times here, the money he's losing if she dies?
Right, and I think the other question is jury retention. Does the jury remember that earlier last week that Tex McIver's salary was $250,000? It already, from what we just heard on this witness, her salary was less than his.
Yeah.
So combined,
wait. There was something about her salary plus her income from the rent.
Right, but she didn't know, this
Right.
woman,
And-
exactly what the additional income was.
Right, and now then they point to loans and why he could want her dead due to a loan.
Again, he's 75. You know what trouble it is to go through an estate and all the tax issues. Who wants that?
The prosecution's case for motive isn't. I think they're failing at meeting their burden. They're not meeting their burden.
As we hear 1,000 times, you don't have to prove motive.
But you have to reach the burden, and they're not
You have to be
reaching
able
the
to prove the
burden.
case beyond a reasonable
You don't
doubt.
have to prove motive.
You have to prove intent.
Yeah, let me tell you something. Juries want to hear motive.
Yes, they want to hear
If he shows up with a
That's part of the
30-year-old
narrative.
girlfriend, guy's going down the drain. He doesn't have one.
And there's been some insinuation, but not a motive about that in this case. Take a break. We will come back live in that courtroom in a few moments. They are continuing to gather the questions from the jury. Again, a unique aspect of Texas law. I shouldn't say unique. It happens in some states, but not in most, where the jurors can ask the questions directly of the witnesses. And this is a legal recruiter who testified that the defendant, in this case, accused of murdering his wife, was looking for a job, looking for a new job after she died. And the question is, why? I'm not really sure that really helps the prosecution that much. It looks like he's actually being let go. Ed Hayes, does this help the prosecution?
I mean, in theory, the defense argument is, look, he doesn't want to lose her income. The prosecution argument is, well, he'll make more. He can make more by going to business for himself, but who cares?
Right.
He doesn't have a wife, right? So, I mean, and he's got to go back to work.
All right.
He's 75 years old. Who wants to go back and work hard?
All right, Carissa Kranz, you were named by American Society of Legal Adversaries or something, 40 under 40. So if you are that big a deal lawyer, you explain to me what the prosecution is doing here.
The prosecution is just confusing the jury right now.
On purpose?
And they're focusing on the money and the money and the money, but what about the emotion of Mr. McIver? He lost his wife. Maybe he wants to go back to work because he doesn't want to wallow in his own sorrow of what happens, and he wants to get busy. Maybe,
right.
But he also wants a certain number to go back to work because it has to be worth it for him to grind those hours out. But it may not be about money. It might be just him wanting to be busy and not realizing that he's now alone in his 70s for the rest of his life and that he lost the woman he loved.
Let's do this. Let's go back in the courtroom. There's a new witness coming to the stand. If this witness is not interesting, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to replay the testimony from the driver of the car Remember, she was shot in the back seat of a car while someone was driving. The driver is the key eyewitness here. We're going to listen in live and figure out what's going on here. If it's not compelling enough, we're going to go back to the driver because that was critical testimony. Let's listen.
I am Nicole Carroll, and I am employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Division of Forensic Science, also known as the State Crime Lab.
And what do you do for the GBI?
I'm a forensic DNA analyst.
All right, it seems that this is in part record keeping here with regard to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Let's keep an eye on that. In the meantime, let's play one of the critical moments in this case, and that is when the driver of the car testified. Remember, Tex McIver shoots his wife in the back seat of a car. Her best friend is driving the car. The question is, what exactly did she see when it happened? Let's play that piece of sound from this critical witness right now.
It's locked, and I looked at mine, and my door lock was up. So I hit the button and locked the doors, and I said, no, now they're locked. And I think that's the last thing that she said.
Before?
I heard a big boom, and I didn't know what it was. I thought there was an explosion somewhere, and my head turned to the right, and I looked out the window and wondered where there was an explosion, or if somebody behind us was getting ready to hit us, or something had happened behind us. I did not realize that it was gunshot right away.
How did it sound?
It was loud.
And so can you tell the jurors what happened next?
Diane turned around, she turned around this way. She swung around and she says, Tex, what did you do?
Tex, what did you do? And did he say anything?
He said the gun discharged.
And so, what did you do when Diane McIver turned around to look?
When she turned around, I turned around and realized seconds. This was all happening in seconds. And I saw a puff of smoke, and I could see his hands. And I could see the top of the gun, I could see part of the gun, his hands, and some of the bag.
Okay.
And his hand was moving like this.
Show the jurors again what you saw.
Something like this.
What she saw right after her best friend was shot in the back seat of her car. Let's. We're going to take a break in a minute, but you were asking about how she was able to see and turn around, Carissa. She stopped. I assume she turned around and was able to see, the aftermath.
That's what she's saying, but if you think about it logically, I think it lends some doubt into her testimony if that's possible. If you're just shot in the back, do you really have the range of motion to swing around and turn to the back seat and say, hey, I think you just shot me? Also, if you watched the video last week when she was taken out of the car, she was practically paralyzed. They had to lift her out, lift her legs. I'm not sure she really had the range of motion.
Was the seat the seats that they were used? They have to be.
So they're recreating the car.
They reenacted it just
You
then.
can't have an assurance that you're going to shoot through there and kill somebody.
But I think she's showing her location.
Yeah, I agree, but he knows how big the seat is, how thick it is. All right? You have no assurance when you fire into that seat that you're going to hit somebody on the other side and kill them. You just don't.
If I were a defense attorney, I would point to the fact that she's trying to reenact, and in her reenaction, she's literally leaning to the person in the passenger seat as if that is his wife and showing her swing around, which I think lends doubt.
Come right back with live testimony in a moment.